we wait for a few more folks to come in.
Cool. Yeah, thanks a lot, Jessica. Hey everyone, I'm Andrej. Unfortunately, I was not able to make the last call, but I watched it. It was very cool. So in short, for those of you who don't know me, don't know what I'm doing, I run deepwork, which is essentially a product design studio, and I'm building it to be a decentralized product design studio, which means that there's a particular business case and a very specific kind of environment in which it's operating. And yeah, today I'll show you a lot of how it works and which problems we encountered and how we solved them, especially in terms of like quality control. So yeah, let's do intros.
Can I ask a quick question? Are we recording? And if we're not, can we? Because I think there'll at least be some other people who will want to catch up.
Good point. I'm not recording, and if I share my screen, I'm not sure if I can. But if I can try, I can record my screen.
And if somebody else has, I unfortunately don't have OBS set up on this machine.
So Penguin, I am also recording.
Cool. Nice.
Thank you.
I haven't recorded with this computer though, so I hope it comes out good. I usually do them on
I'm gonna go down the list, and yeah, just want to do like a high 30 seconds intro, so I'll pass to Bagsy. Okay, Bagsy's shy. Ben Jacobs.
Oh, sorry, did you call me? Hi.
Oh, hey, just a 15 second, 30 second introduction.
Hey, sorry, yeah, I woke up late. I saw there was a Google Meet. I clicked on it. I'm here. Finding out why.
Great, sounds like the skill forest. All right, Ben Jacobs, how are ya?
Hey, nice to meet everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Excited to chat.
Cool, Blair.
Hi everyone, I'm an engineer at Grassroots Econ, and we have some certificate NFT stuff coming up in the next few months, so I'm just tracking along with y'all. And I'll pass to Daniel, OSBINA.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm organization design, governance, of sorts, from a social system design, not from an engineering perspective. And I'm not sure how I end up in this group. But I kind of love the concept. It's a problem I've been annoyed with for many years. So I'm kind of excited some of the ideas that are being explored here. I'll pass to Matteo Petri.
Okay, Mateo's quiet, so I'm gonna go to Katoya.
Can you hear me? Ooh, I must have left my private Gmail logged in. Yeah, I'm from Michigan, Miss Sam. I was just curious. Beth shared the link with us. We already had a skill tree stuff during Metafest, and yeah, to see things happening. So yeah, I'm kind of curious, so I joined.
Okay, great. Katoya.
Hey everyone, Chris Katoya. I am Program Manager at Block Science Labs, and also organizing CAD Foundation. I'm really excited to be here. I also advise DNS.F, which is an identity startup for Web3, tightly coupled with NFT skill and achievement NFTs. So really excited to see what people are doing.
Hello, Mr. Frazier.
Hello, hey, so I head up Block Science Labs, so Zartler invited me, so interested to see what this is all about. Maybe I can help a little bit, we'll see.
James Waugh, just going down the list here. James, with Near first.
Hey, I'm a community manager at Near, very interested to listen and learn, and hopefully collaborate.
Netta Verde is here. Hey Jen, we're just doing 15-second introductions.
Hey, how you doing? Hi, I'm here, Metagate TUC 1 Hive, checking it out. Happy to be here.
Thanks, I'm Prime.
Hi folks, I'm an infrastructure engineer. If you have the chance to play with a skill bot in metagame or Red Guild, that was me. And yeah, happy to be here, just curious and lurking.
Awesome. We love lurkers. V.
I'm Zargum. I'm a researcher, founder of Block Science, sometimes contributor to Metagame and One Hive and other things because I love DAOs. And this particular bit of stuff I've tried to help catalyze with some short posts in Metagame and whatnot. And I've been fortunate enough to get to co-hack a little with Andrej, so I'm excited you're all here.
Awesome. And Penguin, our champion for recording.
Yeah, so I'm in Metagame, Metafactory, Achievement, Machi, Defiant Pixel Society. Pretty much all over the place. Like skills, done a deep work, hyper sprint. Happy to be involved. Thanks.
Cool. And Keith is here. Thanks, Keith, for joining us.
Skip the.
Oh, your audio's a little quiet.
Better?
A little bit.
Yeah, I was saying that I think you missed the cut without the thing.
That's okay. Okay, Vikrant, you're the last one. You and
Alright, so I'm Vikrant Patankar. I'm a freelance product designer working with deepwork currently, and especially working with Andrej on this new skill system that we are developing. So yeah, that's it.
Alright. So, Keith, you're the last one, and then we can hand it off to Andrej to get us started. Oh, Keith is a robot.
Got some dubstep.
Cool.
That's Pete. Pete's awesome. He's a robot today. Love you, Pete. All right. So, Andrej, I'm going to pass it to you to get us going here. And I had this scheduled for, let's see, we had it scheduled for an hour and a half. So the first hour will be like Andrej with feedback, and then anybody who wants to stick around for the last 30 minutes to hack a little bit more deeply. So yeah, take it away.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, I'm super excited about this. I also haven't slept that much tonight, so I apologize for any mental gaps, but I'll try to be as succinct as possible. So yeah, it's very cool to show you something that I've been working on. Basically, over the next probably about half an hour, I'll go through what deep work exactly is and the kind of justifications and reasons for its organizational design so far, and basically try and cool. Yeah, if you have any comments, just drop in the chat. How we designed kind of a skill system, which is geared towards kind of producing the highest quality work possible, but in a decentralized manner. That said, it's not fully decentralized yet, so this is like only the first steps, and we kind of only have a prototype running, but I'm hoping to kind of motivate you all to keep this going further and work with as many of you as possible, because you seem to be a very sharp bunch. So yeah, and also at the end I'll show you also how you can basically implement this structure yourself, and I also prepared a couple of things that I will share with you. So let me just show a couple of slides first. I'll try to kind of narrate them over so it's easier to understand what I'm talking about. 1 second. So essentially, and this kind of to start at the beginning, as I said earlier, deepwork is a product design studio, and I think it's important to say that there's a very, very specific value exchange between the organization and the clients. And so the clients are, in our case, developer teams who don't have a visual interface or any design resources. And so what we offer to them is basically high-end product design, and it was always geared towards basically creating the highest quality possible. And that's not very easy in itself, but it's also becomes harder the more actors and the more designers come on board. And kind of the challenges I'll explain to you in a bit will be prominent for why that's like how to kind of address the centralized quality control. So the first thing to mention, I'll have a little bit of like symbolic terminology. I'll use these little green circles for individuals or like workers, and then rectangles are normally like for projects, but this is just a quick kind of upfront intro. You don't have to remember that. The important part is that this is kind of the way that these the projects are set up, or like our service in the organization. So we work in very concrete, precise batches of work. I just call them projects, but we can call them whatever. And the idea is to kind of keep them as iterative loops, so that they don't they don't extend into infinity. So it's because it's a service, it's more difficult to kind of have a very specific end date or delivery date, but we designed it in a way that it's always like you will always have a very specific start date and a very specific end date. The more frequent you keep these projects, or the shorter you can keep them, the better you can kind of improve on the internal system. And that said, these projects are kind of units of iteration, so there's not necessarily time-based. So in our case, it's like a week, but could also be technically longer, although the shorter the better. But it depends on the organization and how that, like what that unit will be. So for instance, if we were a restaurant, we wouldn't have like one project, we would have a lot of burgers. In that case, it would be like one of these units would be probably like a week, so that you can kind of run through a particular cycle and then iterate on the decisions you make in the business. And so one project just kind of encapsulates an iteration of a particular change of your internal structure. I hope this makes more or less sense. By the way, if you have any questions, also just type them in the chat. I'm aware that I might sometimes miss out on things or phrase them incorrectly. So the first problem that comes up with this kind of design is that, so first of all, the benefit is, yeah, you can iterate on your internal processes as fast as possible, which is important because you want to kind of keep improving and stay attentive to your environment, or like to the market. And that arises though is that if you don't get a project booked, that means that you can't really staff anyone in that particular time. And if you have full-time employees, that means you're basically wasting money, and you're wasting someone's free time because they're just not doing anything. We actually had that in the beginning. We had like 2 people fully hired for like a couple of months, and then at some point it was clear that like they worked only 2 weeks a month just because there was no work. And so full-time employees weren't really possible, so we ended up just kind of creating a freelance network. And then with that, like a lot of problems start coming up. But also it seems like that's kind of the only way business can be decentralized properly, at least from that perspective. As a quick kind of intro to the product, this is, like we just call it Hypersprint. It's just basically a product design sprint. There's 3 days of workshops, there's 3 days of product design, there's user testing. I'm just saying that because I will kind of use that as an example throughout the following slides. But essentially, that's kind of what our one product looks like. It has a very specific start date, it's a very specific end date, and it is actually kind of presented as a product. It's not a service. It's like, well, it's a service as a product. So it has a very specific price and it has very specific content. I'll explain to you what that means a bit later. So one of the things that we also wanted to make sure when we design stuff, like design the organization, is that we make sure that nobody ever has the possibility of burning out, and kind of did a little bit of research on that. Also, hence the name deepwork. That was Charlie's idea, but we essentially wanted to kind of make sure that the working conditions are as ideal as possible, and got inspired by a lot of historical innovation on labor. But essentially, 4 hours of meaningful work was kind of a default mode, or like that's the kind of goal, because outside of that, people can still do whatever they want. And in our case, that's essentially what makes it also interesting to work with deep work, because freelancers just show up for a meeting or show up for exactly a particular time slot. They work for 4 hours and then they're done. Anything else like admin or automation is basically taken over by us, with the perspective of it being automated fully, just to a point or to an extent that the meaningful work can be done by humans and everything else can be done by machines. And and like traditionally, or like other agencies, or like even like basically where I come from before I started deep work, I was probably working like 10 hours a day, and I also had like not all of it was fun work, not all of it was meaningful. It was a lot of admin. So with the beginning of kind of delivering these projects, and you might all know or be aware of the DeFi space or the blockchain space in general, has a challenge finding and coordinating, finding good design, but also coordinating around solving good design like the design problems well, and designing an interface, but also designing the structure of the product in itself. And so, as I started with Charlie in the beginning, as the two of us, it became clear that we probably cannot handle the projects ourselves if we kind of try and saturate the market. So we got way more requests than we could actually handle. And that pressured us to come up with ways to actually scale. And so essentially, like, obviously you can have like back-to-back one project at a time, but that makes it a bit complicated because you'll have to basically decline a lot of projects at some point. Cool, interesting. Yeah. So yeah, that might be interesting. Also, yeah, we should. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. Our solution was basically then, okay, let's get some people in and let's just do projects at the same time. And that worked for like 2 months. And then because it was like only like maybe 1 or 2 projects at the same time, so we could kind of observe that until a point where we basically found a person who could do some user research for a project, and we were like, yeah, this is cool. He knows his stuff. He has a good like track record. He has actually done some like product design before with us, and he was like doing user research on other projects as well before. So we were like, all right, let's get him in. Got him on a project, and then he fucked up. And it was not his fault, because he just did his job. He just did what he thought was right, because he did kind of, the best to his abilities for how he's been judged before in the industry. And to him, that was the quality standard. But that led to like several, because, in a particular case, we ended with user research mostly. It just basically like ruined the whole project. And the clients weren't really happy with it, even though the results were good, or like we could save it, but it was just not a desirable outcome. And so that became a huge problem, because if we relied on nepotism, or like finding some people who we know and we trust them, then we can't really scale, because we will always make some kind of mistake. And if it's just the two of us, we can't really like staff enough people if we actually get to like a higher demand and try to batch even more projects at the same time, because then we have to basically quality control every single person. And that's just unfeasible if we also want to work on projects, or like actually do some work, or just have a life. And so one idea was to actually get in the HR department and again, these circles are individuals. Just imagine these are people who are not experts yet. They're not part of it. I call them collaborators, but I'll explain to you in a moment why. But with the HR department, you have a problem that it's pretty expensive. First of all, it's pretty expensive to have one, and it doesn't possess the skills of the actual work. So the people who normally do HR are, like, at least traditionally, not involved in the projects, and they don't understand the whole product scope to the last detail, especially if the skill set is like super rare, super hard to find, and also constantly changes over time. And not only is it difficult to kind of quality control someone who comes in, but it's also actually very, very expensive over the long term to reach out and find people who fit into the particular particular skill area. The other approach would be to actually involve the experts in the hiring process. This is how Valve Software does it. So they have an HR department, but it's kind of a made up one because it's mostly consists of people who work there, and that can work. So and again, with Valve, that worked really, really well, but it clashes with our idea of having like 4 hours of meaningful work, because you have only, like, if you want to work only for 4 hours a day and you want to do meaningful work, hiring is an additional kind of time effort. And so you spend time on hiring, you spend time on admin because you need to quality control, and people lie with their resumes, and then you're like, you just let someone pass who lied, you're fucked. So it's really a bad or like uncomfortable situation where, you know, the goal of you, or like, well, your goal is just to do work, like just to do something that you find enjoyable and meaningful. So that also wasn't really like a possibility, but a combination of both turned out to make sense. So that was kind of the first approach to actually do the quality control right, and probably also where the whole project actually started, because I think there's a way to learn a skill through online courses, but you actually learn something when you actually work on it, and that not only gives you the right skills and the right kind of what do you call it, like capabilities, or it doesn't only show that you can fulfill or complete a particular task, but it also lets the expert on the project observe how well you work and see firsthand that you're exactly that person you actually said you would be, promised to be, or like provided with examples. So in the end, that's kind of that ended up being a really good combination. So what we did basically was providing all the work and all the kind of learning material online for free. So I mean, not just for free, but just like basically open source everything that we do and how we do it. And so because if we would do it for internal, we just kind of shared it so people could learn it themselves, but also let them apply these learnings right away. So we would guide them, or like still guiding collaborators into places of like resources they can look at, like if it's user research, they can watch interviews, they can watch previous interviews, they have access to like books and recommendations, and then they also kind of sorry, not recommendations, that's my brain, so they can get access to books and videos, and just general learning material that's accessible online, but they kind of take that, learn it, and then internalize it by actually applying it with another person, and the other person can guide them a little bit, but the actual the actual learning experience comes from them challenging themselves to the proximal zone of their development. And so another interesting thing that comes from it is also that because everything is project-based, these people keep learning with each individual project because they get exposed to new kind of uncomfortable or uncertain environment. And so not only is the kind of onboarding relatively simple, but it also allows them to stay in there and keep learning about particular new problems, about new design problems in the space, about technologies because they get involved in the projects. So it never really gets boring. So from our perspective, this is what I see as a skill. So a skill essentially means that you can produce a particular part of a product that the organization is offering. So for instance, this is with user testing. That is a skill. It's tied to the organization. And in this case, like, you have an expert, and the expert is judging, or like is basically setting the bar for the quality of the product and of the outcome, depending on the market demand. So when we have a client, they know what to expect based on our previous track record. So the experts are incentivized to kind of reach that standard and even over deliver. And so if someone new comes in, they automatically will have to basically reach that same standard. Otherwise, they won't be like an expert. And as you go through different projects, you have different points of view from different experts of a similar kind of quality level. And that makes this kind of learning experience much, much more refined. And so you can basically from there branch out the skill into an individual set of tasks. So you can always kind of set how a particular skill is constructed. So like you would have user testing, but you can also branch it apart into like, you know, the individual tasks that need to be done. So, you know, finding user testers, running interviews, writing a summary. Obviously, in reality, there's more of them, but these are a lot easier to actually do and complete, and even kind of assign almost like difficulty levels to them, because some things will be easier than others. And if you let one of these collaborators select what they think is kind of their proximate zone of development for themselves, and the expert confirms it, then you have a relatively fair split in how, well, not just fair in terms of it lets everybody kind of stay in a position where they do the most meaningful work they want, even though it's like just individual tasks. I just want to, forgot.
Do you want to break for one moment to like allow for a few questions, or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. So far, any questions? Half an hour through.
Yeah, like a little bit of a conversation in the side, the chat. It's stuff you and I have talked about before, Andre, but given that it's coming up from others, I think it might be worth talking a little bit about the dimensions, the skills versus sort of the capabilities at a task level versus the most expert people who have to be able to define the work, which is actually the hardest thing to codify, because you're like, someone has to be able to break a big, you know, multi-project program into chunks, figure out the work. That's like often the most experienced person. I think you have a creative director in your schemas that kind of matches to that higher level concept. And, you know, for block science, we have like lead engineers who run project in addition to being contributors. But I think there's a kind of underlying ontology, and Bagsy kind of says apprentice, journeyman, master, and I think, anyway, this in my play, there's some essence to this that is like highly repetitive, where we're just like, this stuff exists in the social systems very naturally, but we have to map it very carefully in order to try to build software that enables it. And I think that's where the real crux of the problem comes, is weirdly enough, like we understand it pretty well intuitively, but our intuition doesn't build software for us. So we can't build software until we figure out how to take those representations and match them to things like, you know, databases and methods and like, you know, user experience, where someone goes in and says, hey, I'm going to do this project, or I'm going to take this collaborator and train them, and I'm going to sort of sign off on what they've accomplished. So, you know, at least from my perspective, there's some room for people to discuss their own version of the field there. Anyway, that's my contribution to the discussion.
Yeah, no, cool, thanks. I think, yeah, it makes total sense. I'll also talk a little bit into more detail on like this deconstruction of the skill, because as you say, like, yeah, you have this master as the creator of a particular product, and you essentially kind of deconstruct, or like they have to deconstruct themselves in order to provide this framework for someone else to follow their steps and kind of work with them. I'm just thinking it's probably better if I just kind of go through that because there's not that much left. Although, yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, sorry.
Well, see, it's up to you, and it also just kind of depends on how much people want to chime in. I think we only really paused to make sure that some people got to jump in and either ask clarifying questions or provide their own examples.
Cool, yeah.
So I think one of the other things to kind of mention in this is that no two projects are going to need the same kind of people. So some projects might require more experts, and some projects might require more collaborators. Especially if you consider the Git book that Jessica posted, it's really helpful in kind of demonstrating the different project structures. So I think that fits really well in what you're talking about.
Yeah, in my model, I basically assume that collaborators are always optional. So a project should be possible only with experts on it, because you then don't have the pressure to actually find literally everyone and have more freedom. So then you basically can create an environment where the experts are incentivized to split tasks with someone new and find someone new, because they just get to do less work. And yeah, sorry.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that there's an observed sort of, we'll call it local Nash equilibrium, where it's like, I'm going to do it myself because I know how to do it. Right. There's a scaling issue, but it's actually work to find collaborators. It's work to train collaborators. There's a lot of short-term costs and generally not a lot of short-term benefit. And so in practice, at least my findings from both training data scientists and like token engineers and different kinds of skills that fit this niche, that like I really have to commit to investing in finding the people, vetting the people, training people in order to get the benefits of that work. And by default, it's often easier to just do it myself by virtue of the capability. And the commitment to find and hire and train people comes from two incentives. One is to scale to meet more demand at the individual level, like multipliers on my own time, because I can focus on defining work and breaking things down, or like creative problem solving, and then some more of the lower level skills can get delegated. But then even beyond that, there's like if you're trying to push for the growth of a field, like at least I am trying to with some of the token engineering stuff, you need to create a feed forward process that grows the skill set. And in order to do that, you also need to commit to that training. And my reason for being enthusiastic about this particular work is that I think that we need a sort of, a decentralized way for that to propagate. Meaning, like if you expend the effort to teach someone, you want it to be easy enough for them to expend the effort to teach somebody else, even if it takes time for that expertise to grow. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess we're kind of on the same page, Penguin, in that it's important to recognize that you don't need the non-experts, but the non-experts in this system are part of the growth process. Until you learn how to scale the experts and also to level up the non-experts, you have difficulty expanding the skill set or like growing the overall system-wide capacity to do high-quality work.
Yeah, and maybe Andrej, also for some context, like we're experiencing this all over the place across the token engineering ecosystem, but like you're just in this initial test or like research, I guess, before you start to develop a product. Is that correct? Or do you want to frame it a bit about where you are in that journey?
Right. So, I mean, yeah, thank you. So this works for us so far, and as a prototype though. So with a caveat, I do have an entire like separate project on the compensation and like the actual kind of tokenization of this, because it's a challenge in itself how you actually split up the compensation between these two so that everybody, especially the experts, individually make the decision that's best for the entire organization, and obviously also for themselves, while splitting the work with someone else, and like kind of while potentially sacrificing part of their salary. But I'm not going to go into that this time. But essentially, yes, Daniel.
Yeah, well, I'm new to this group. I'm Theo, by the way. I work in recruitment, and I help the big projects with finding people to join their cause. And one topic that I'm interested in is how can we get to a decentralized community of people, of professionals, where new joiners can come in and maybe pick up tasks or join apprenticeship programs and sort of have a mentor that they can learn from. But in the same time, how could you split up work into smaller tasks? So for example, bountying issues like on Gitcoin. The challenge would then be, okay, you'd get people that want to learn a craft, but wouldn't necessarily know how to do it. You'd have bounties somewhere else. The missing link would be that you need a sort of mentor who's okay with allocating a few hours of his time to sort of teach people that are interested in learning on how to solve those bounties, probably with those tasks, and then the reward could then be split between the mentor and the mentees as well, to a certain extent. Sorry for jumping in like that, and I know probably new here. I haven't spoken with anyone until now, but that's
also what I'm trying to what I'm focusing on here. So Daniel, you also had a question. I'm
kind of curious why the discussion is emphasizing so much the economic model or the incentive model around learning teaching skills, as opposed to more specifically the mapping of skills. Is more because the learning teaching is a huge problem, and of course they're related, but perhaps they don't need to be tackled from the get-go together. If the mapping can be nailed down, that's already such a tremendous achievement.
Well, okay, let me maybe continue with this for a couple more slides, because I actually kind of go into exactly these things. And yeah, I'll just finish it all. I'll try to keep myself short as well, because these are very valid questions that I've asked myself too. So I hope that I'll give you all the answers in the next couple of minutes. So let's assume we're splitting up these tasks. Experts do one set, collaborators do another set. That way, everybody's contribution on a particular project is actually also trackable. So if someone does a particular task, it's in relationship to a particular project, a particular outcome. So it's not just that you split individual tasks and be like, hey, this guy does this guy does this, but it's actually kind of trackable. What exactly was the outcome, and what is the project? How much has it been paid for? So you can get a pretty good connection to the exact kind of market dynamic, and so that way you basically kind of upgrade relatively quickly. In deepwork, we have different skills, and so one of them is workshop facilitation, prototyping, user testing. So that way we can always also keep track of exactly who's the expert. What that also allows is to actually start mapping the skill trees in terms of which skills depend on each other. So let's say facilitation is pretty difficult, and you could only do that once you've done something before. So not only can you kind of track exactly what someone has done before and how good they are at a particular task, but you can also create a particular learning trajectory that is smooth, and also modify it depending on if some project needs some editing, depending on what the market currently demands. So these things are this is just to say that these things are highly flexible. You can also create specific requirements. So in order to become a facilitator, you don't need to do the entire product this prototyper skill, but only like one task from here, one task from here, and then you have like you're allowed to be to get that skill. And so here's the actual kind of reason for like the way to map these things out, or like the reason for why I went from the beginning of how everything works.
No.
It's because it's kind of a split. So on one hand, we have projects, or let's say this is a part of a project, part of a product, but a project that's separate into tasks. That is the direct representation. Like the skill is basically an attestation that you're able to complete one entire project.
You're such a loser. You're such a liar.
Like what I call, or like what we call capabilities, are basically attestations to be able to complete a particular smaller subtask or task. So if you have like all the capabilities of a particular skill, that's what you have. Like that's your skill. And I think this is slightly kind of a different perspective on what exactly a skill is, because what it then allows you to do is like basically have individual skills that are in direct relationship to the issuing organization, which is in direct relationship to the quality which it produces, which is in direct relationship to the actual market demand. So it's a very very complete track from the actual kind of badge to the work. To the actual work that has been done on the project, up to the most granular task and the time when it has been completed. And I think this is slightly different from, like the perspective on this is slightly different from like skills and skill trees in video games, because video games, they're designed with a particular environment. They give you the skill tree already, but in real life that environment is constantly changing, and you first need to adapt to the environment before you can actually attest it. So what this also presupposes is that all of these skills can change, and they will change over time, and they're only as prominent as they're actually necessary on the market or in the environment. And so they can also change within an organization. Like for us, for instance, we have like deepwork. This is the part where it's based on the talent. It's based on the people who are like the creator of a particular skill, of a particular product. So it's not just a skill. It's not just a universal like title for something that people are capable of. It's the ability to complete and produce a very specific product, deconstructed
I'm busy,
all
I'm
of
gonna
its
call.
tasks and
I'm busy.
kind of
No.
capabilities.
No.
And so you can also create
I
another
said no.
product and then deconstruct that. If that
Remember?
reaches a particular
Someone
market
on
demand
it
that
said,
requires scaling,
"That's nice you're my
you
fan."
get through
But
that
can you
system
give me credit for
and
the alpha and
kind of
username?
have
Because I wanted
way easier
to,
way to
because I
replicate
liked
this.
all their stuff, so I kind of
And so
wanted to
in general,
copy
this
it.
is not like
And guess what?
about deep work.
They
This is
were
more about,
copying
like, finding
someone
a way
else
to
the
create
whole
a
time.
template for
And
the
they
whole,
said,
system
"Hey,
that can be
nice
reused by
you're a
any
fan,
organization.
but can you please
So
give credit for the
you are your
alpha and
organization, that's
username?"
like an
bro,
organism,
no,
you're
I will
producing some
not
kind of product
do
of
that
value
credit.
to the
If
environment,
you
and then
literally,
that is
I'm
the
busy.
like if you
skill that's being
literally
tested by your organization. And
are copying someone, you're
I can
faking
go a little
that
bit
you
into like
didn't,
how that actually
right?
looks right now, because the current infrastructure is like obviously off-chain and based on like no-code tools. So the skill tracking we actually do in Discord. Most of the user interface parts are just type forms, and then tie them together with Zapier and store everything else on Google Drive and Gitbook. So, and this is very easily replicatable, but it also like obviously not perfect because you can still tamper with it. But it allows to play around and to adjust it and to shift it towards a very specific kind of organization and product type. So it obviously, like Indian said, there's not every project is slightly different. It requires a different set of skills. It requires a different set of tasks. Sometimes it just requires different people. But that whole structure allows you to pretty much be very, very modular with how you approach it. So I can show you maybe how that's. I just have to share the whole window here, but I can show you how that currently looks in deepwork, as it's all like in a in Discord. If that gives more context. Otherwise, is there anything else in terms of questions that I haven't answered yet?
I joined quite late, so I didn't get how the skills will be mapped. Some ideas that you played around with or experimented with until now.
So, what do you mean by mapped?
Well, what I got from joined up the call and Daniel mentioned as well is that sort of the discussion moved from how to map skills to an incentivation model, if I understood correctly, Daniel.
So there was Michael and Penguin were talking, if I understood correctly, a little bit about like the development of the skill, the stages of mastery, and what incentivizes one person or to teach another one, and so on. And for my understanding, that was a little bit different from the original intended, or let's say the core of it, that was more about the skill mapping itself, irrespective of how such a skill is acquired or developed or passed on to others. But it was, yeah, just a remark. That's it. Not necessarily that this is the purpose of this group.
Yeah, well, I'm like experimenting with the ideas with Talent Network was sort of a decentralized framework for recruiting, and mapping skills would be part of that as well. So I was just curious if.
So I think it's really important to understand the difference between mapping skills and mapping skills. I know that sounds kind of tricky, but some of the work that I did with Andrej was about mapping skills. Meaning it's the same in all of these instances of mapping skills, because like I've run data science teams, I've been helping build the token engineering community by merging some skills in economics and other things, and like there's a really wide breadth of skills to be mapped, and they tend to be project contextual, meaning you kind of have to work backwards from what you are consistently having to accomplish. And so
they would probably sit in different trees, and then it would all come down to probably they could tie it together.
But you need to work backwards from, if I were going to do a project, and I'm the expert, say, and I know what the end-to-end set of steps were going to be if I had to do them, and I maybe could do them, but it would take a while, and I want to scale out. So I need some people who can do those tasks with me, even people who are skilled enough that they can check my own work. We're going to have some testing and some validation, and so I need to hire first other experts to serve as, collaborators with me. And in the absence of other experts, I need to train other experts sufficiently well that they can sanity check my work. And then even as that work expands, we need, other people to fulfill some of the lower level tasks, like, hey, here's a specification, go code this up, bring it back, we'll run the test, we'll review it, maybe we'll update it. And so what I'm getting at is that the breadth of the fields, at least that I've led in, are always so wide that I need a team of mixed skills. Like, there's a couple of people who can do everything, but it's pretty rare. You need to be able to identify the component. We'll just say that the master has expertise in multiple related skills. So then that person is defining work. Then the expert is a person who has the skill. And that means that they can do a bundle of tasks, and that bundle of tasks fulfills a project. So it's a smaller chunk over which they can grab it. So my whole mastery is expertise over, say, 2 or 3 things that need to be done together. If each of those things is a project, then you have the skill, if you could do the project yourself effectively, or at least you could define the work and oversee it and approve it. And then you have a capability if you can do an individual task. And once you start creating that system of describing a few layers of work that you can cover both breadth and depth, and you can go into a particular area and say, okay, well, we're going to do a project like a mechanism design, or like a client in token engineering. I'm like, okay, well, it's going to need to be an AMM, and it needs to have some mathematical properties, and it needs to be safe in certain ways to get it implemented as a smart contract. And so we're going to do some mathematical invariant definitions, and then first some requirements gathering, which is a bit like user research, and then some formal mathematical definitions, and then some derivations of mechanisms that preserve those properties, and then maybe a CAD model to demonstrate a bunch of behaviors under different circumstances, and then you might write a software specification. Someone might write a piece of software, and someone else might run tests on that. So you can see how wide the skills, the requirements can be. This is a big difference from being in master category, where you are both expert in and program manager of a pretty wide range of tasks. Then you need to kind of sub-project it. You can have experts within a project domain, and within that, you can have tasks, and you can develop a capability when you can be relied upon to complete a specific task, and you develop a skill when you can be relied upon to oversee a particular bundle of work, and so on. And from this, we could actually deconstruct fields in order to describe various people's evolution within those fields, in particular their specialization around certain skills, or their breadth around sort of managing the execution of a broader project. And the tricky thing here is that right now we rely almost exclusively on highly centralized credentials and or institutions to do this. And my take on this is, I want it to be able to propagate, outpace that kind of centralization. We want to be able to say, like, hey, I have this skill and I'm going to invest in teaching you, and maybe all I really want is that you also participate in the same ecosystem. And if you start to level up, that you have a tendency to want to teach other people too. At least that's how I see some of these emerging fields actually growing. Because right now we're stuck in this weird state where there's lots of people who aspire to do certain things, and there's no incentives or no structure to build a workforce, because we have a group of experts who are slammed with too much work, and they're constantly working, and anything they do to teach is effectively gift to the community. And then you've got a bunch of people who want to learn, who are sometimes taking on jobs they can't do, and it actually undermines growing community, because people are like, oh, those people aren't real. I hired some dude and it sucks. And there's this weird tension. And so at least for me, this project is about trying to break that tension and create an easier way, or at least a structure that allows us to go in and start building these trees up a little bit at a time. And for me, with a couple of my team members are on, and we've had some conversations back and forth with Andrej about mapping our own domain. But he can't do it for us. We have to learn this, kind of internalize it, and then start to figure out how to map our own bits, maybe a little bit at a time, and grow after that as we see how it works.
Well, actually, just thanks for giving more context on that. I was referring only to mapping skills from yesterday. I'm not sure if I should say mapping skills now, but just a way in which you can sort of store all that information in a place, right? And then people, once they've joined that platform, that service, they could sort of outline the skills that they have at the moment, but potentially using some proofs they had from the past, like certificates, references, or anything like that, they could validate some of those skills. And as they go into projects, they could be then validated again, or sort of build their own skill tree from there. But thanks for sharing more context on it, Michael.
Yes. So here it's actually not necessary to have any any certificates or any previous work or any previous proof. Obviously, it is kind of a trust relationship. So you want to present that you do it and can do it in order to make the expert trust you. But yeah.
I think people could sort of give their own input and build their own skill trees, or at least leave the input there, so other people could have an image of their abilities, capabilities, and what sort of they could handle. Then it will come a matter of trust, but I guess that with time that could be built up as well or validated, since they would probably interact with other people from the network or from a service.
Yeah. So yeah, actually on that note, I basically wrote everything out and like what I just basically went through in a like Git book, and I also want, because I know that this is quite a lot of work to kind of implement for if you want to just try it out. It's like you basically would have to map it out. I'm happy to like basically work with, I don't know, 3-5 teams who are interested and help you do that. So I have like, here I have described the infrastructure, how I set it up with this no-code tools, but I'm happy to just like set it up for you because up anyway, I just need to duplicate them to a different like project folder in Typeform and Zapier, and Vikram is helping me with that. And so if anyone is interested, we can just do that. The only thing I need from you, or like, and I'll help you with that as well, is essentially just like basically a list of, I mean, and it could be an example list just to kind of prototype it, a list of capabilities that can specify a particular skill. And ideally, you should have a documentation how these are done, because that saves the, like when you have this working relationship between an expert and a collaborator. If you have a documentation, there's no extra work for the expert, so they don't actually have to mentor, because people like the collaborators are encouraged or encouraged to do the research themselves, learn on their own, and they only come in at the stage where they actually have to do the work. So the expert is just observing that. So the way we set it up is also in a Git book. So we basically have like for workshop facilitators, we have, I mean, it's called levels. It's a bit outdated, but essentially each level is one of these capabilities. There's, I think, 10 different capabilities. These are very doable tasks, but they're also described in how to do them. And there's more documentation, like references on how to go into more detail, but essentially
about the one from last
exactly
night?
how everything needs to be done, and the ways to learn that and understand it is always kind of provided here, also with examples. So that's essentially the only combination that I cannot provide you with, is like, what is the actual skill that you are offering, or like the product or the sub-product, and the instructions on how to do it. But yeah, like that said, I would love to kind of experiment with that, or like help you setting that up. And so this is like currently my main project, and the goal is obviously to, like, once we have like, I don't know, 3 to 5 teams who tried it out, who figured out what doesn't work for them, which parts need some more changing, then we would have a relatively kind of universal framework for how that could be applied to a lot of different businesses, and then it would make sense also to implement it on chain. And then I guess for me the goal is to kind of try to cover as many different organizations, from like a burger restaurant to like a heavy software development shop, because they're very, very different, but fundamentally the skills are like the mapping of the skills is the same.
I'd be super keen to contribute to an extent that I can. Currently, I've joined MakerDAO as a recruiter, and they want a fully decentralized organization. And there were some discussions about how to map skills as well. So it's not a promise, but I'll do my best to maybe get some traction from the team and get them involved as well. At least experiment with some ideas. And the benefit, I think, it would be that because Maker would split up into different core units, and each core unit would cover a specific topic, then you could have a more diverse.
How are you, Daddy?
That'd be awesome, yeah. I can, so I have a type
You're
one
happy?
for anyone who's interested. I'll post it in the, oh, actually, I don't know. Let me know if that works for your, okay, I don't have the link here. I'll find the link to this and post it in the Telegram group. And this is really just like to get anyone who's, or actually, yeah, I mean, here you can. It's the first one. Just put your name in, and that way I would know who to kind of directly involve into this and kind of create a more active working group. Appreciate it. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions or anything we should talk about? Anything that should have been clearer? Because this is also the first time I generally kind of narrated through this.
So how many skills can this kind of sustain, and kind of how many different models should we try and throw at you?
Vikrant, how much time do we have? Well,
I guess it would depend on it would depend on the test, like the first version of the prototype. Like if you're having we can try it on 3 skills, I guess, to show variation among the, like you can just show the deep work example.
Yeah. So I mean, we have 3 skills, and the way that we kind of track them is in Discord roles. So we have like user researcher. We have, well, actually, maybe this is not the best way to show this, but like where's someone? I think most people have like these badges, and they have like particular experience that they've done. So they kind of fill out. So we have facilitators or facilitation, user research, product design. I think for the first start, it's probably enough to. I would actually do it like personally and try to figure it out in person, so that we can kind of set up something one-on-one that works for you as well. So because I also don't want you to kind of do an experiment that's too small and too like what do you call it? Insignificant, but at the same time also not too big, so it's not overwhelming. And if something breaks, then it breaks everything. I think like if possible, the easiest way is probably to start kind of with one skill, and just to deconstruct that. So here this looks prettier. So basically, like one skill, deconstruct that, write some documentation for that particular thing. If that is something that's that works on a project that you're running, we'll just implement that alongside with what we currently already have. Either way, this whole thing will save time anyway, but yeah, before we go into like full on everything, it's probably best to just play around with different schedules and different depths of work.
Can I also offer that there's a big difference between the sort of POCs that are very much like Web 2 based, which are effectively local to an organization or to a single community. I think one of the cool things about scalability is if it makes its way to a Web 3 footprint where these are NFTs and IPFS hashes and the descriptions of the work and the addresses doing the sign-offs and whatnot, then it does scale quite almost infinitely up to the extent that the community continues to grow, where you would just go publish your own document on a skill, and you'd have to deploy a contract that minted NFTs according to some sign-off logic. But that could propagate to the extent that it could contain a multitude of things that you don't care about and never look at, but at the same time they would share a standard which would allow you to, say, evaluate a new skill just because, hey, you realize you need someone with this skill, and if you trust that decentralized institution, then you're saying, well, it seems like this person got signed off by other people who've gotten signed off by other people who've gotten signed off who are trustworthy, and thus you can sort of make sense of an applicant for a field that you might not have a lot of experience with, even if you didn't previously know that you needed that. But I do think it's important to recognize that the user research side or the user experience side of this, make it scalable, requires us to do a lot of hacking on paper prototypes and try it out with the scores.
Absolutely.
Because if we get the structure wrong, then casting it in stone, so to speak, will harm us more than it helps us.
That's what I mean. So I don't even want, like, obviously, like, this is the dream, but I'm really wary that we have to first experiment more on different models in the no-code and like off-chain environments to really kind of find out all the ways this can break, and only from then like start thinking about its implementation or even like custom user interface. Like that is in the future, but right now I specifically want to focus on the Discord the infrastructure. And I think yeah, so I guess long term, obviously, if we get to create something that becomes more or less of a standard, that would be awesome. I think it would be good to kind of open source that and kind of produce a framework that can be used by literally anyone. But there is a progression towards that stage. You can't just do that right away.
Thanks for that clarification.
Hey, Andrej, one question. In terms of and apologies, I was a bit late, so I don't know if this was
It's all good.
Yeah. In terms of the capabilities and skill tracking, right? How accurate in your experience is or how do you think that those categories, and I don't know all the detailed ones, but let's say that one is UI design level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So there's one sentence, right? Are you finding that these sentences actually capture the totality of the quality of the work, or how?
Well, this is
that enough, or are you finding that this person actually ranks really high, but when I look at their work, actually it's not aligned to what I'm thinking, because either they don't have whatever client servicing skills or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
To capture the totality of the performance.
Well, it does, and it has to, because in order to get the badge, you need to like prove to the person who's supervising you that you can do it to that expected level. And like obviously here sometimes we have a shorter sentence, sometimes we have a longer sentence, but that's not like the full source of truth. There's more information. Like for facilitation, we have an entire like workshop board. What's it called?
It's on my right.
Yeah, this is the old one, but it doesn't matter. It shows the same.
I've seen those. Yeah.
Right. Cool. So there's all over the place. There are instructions on how to do this, but it's also modifiable. So like for facilitation, we have the instructions right here next to the workshop boards, and also here we also have like additional material in other sections for user research. They go a little bit more into detail in some parts. They have like sub-pages with examples and links, and like, so our documentation is quite extensive depending on the difficulty of the task and how difficult it is to kind of learn that. But it's flexible. Like it really depends on what your kind of skill is, or like what the tasks, or like what the capabilities are that you need to attest.
I would add, in my experience, is this effort kind of co-located with, or like parallel with, trying to improve the education and documentation, or like literally just take what an expert would do out of expertise as a chunk and actually busting it up into little pieces and taking 2-hour lectures and turning them into little 15-minute blurbs that say, well, if you're going to do this is what you need to know, which is actually really hard. And it turns out that another maybe missing facet of expertise is that a lot of experts can't decompose it. So the extra work of tearing apart your expertise into little learnable chunks is something that goes a long way to furthering that expertise that might be overlooked, where if it's not obvious how to break it down, then there's work to be done to do that and to document the individual capabilities, etc.
We actually had the same also, because like I basically wrote up most of that myself. I also just left out things or like forgot it, because for me it was like second nature. But then someone else came in and they were like, what do I do here? Like, you didn't even say the time, how long like an exercise takes. It's like, okay, cool. I made a mistake. And I mean, I don't see it as actually as a bad thing, because it improves my way of understanding exactly what I'm talking about, and kind of improves my way to teach things. And either way, like there is no other way. Like you can't do a shitty job, otherwise it's not going to work. And if you're not perfect, that's also fine, because you're improved on that documentation with every single project, because you'll see where there's stuff missing.
Also, there is this thing of shadowing. Like collaborators can often shadow on projects while they're not getting any incentives or getting paid. They just observe the entire process, like how a facilitation is done, or a few user testing sessions. They can just observe things and see what the expert and the other collaborators are working on and how they work. So that thing can also serve as an alternative to this written type of documentation.
That's a very good point. Yeah. So we actually let people, like, everything is openly accessible. You just sign an agreement that you don't like do stupid things on camera in front of the client, because that happened, yes. And so they sign an agreement, and once that's signed, they can just like come into the workshops and just listen in with camera off, and just observe and see how it looks in real life before they get a step closer and actually take over some tasks that they feel comfortable with.
This also kind of answers your question, Michael, that the people, experts often can't condense their thoughts or words or concepts to some easier, to some accessible things. So it's kind of good to like just allow the collaborators to just see the entire process by themselves and soak in the information as much as they can.
We do something similar. We take more junior team members to meetings or internal or external meetings to train them. And yeah, I think there's kind of a value of both. Like if you need to learn before that stuff has been decomposed, then that's definitely the best way. But actually, I think most things can eventually be broken down, even if their lowest elements are, again, 10 to 15 minutes of, here's how you do a thing. But what I realized was that a lot of those things you don't, the more skilled you get, the less you need to show your work. It's like when you're in, even elementary school, and like the teacher's like, show every step of your work, and you do 3 lines, or you can do 15 lines. And if you can do it in 3 lines, you can't even think of the other 12 lines, because you're just like, no, this is how I did it. And so, or someone earlier in their development stage still might need you to show them, oh, actually, let's reverse engineer this a little bit. And yeah, okay, you eventually won't need 15 lines, but actually seeing the 15 lines might help you learn to do it in 3.
I guess it's a matter of setting best practices and processes for people to see them if they want to learn a new skill, they want to grow into new craft or role.
There's a lot of things that are interesting about expertise in particular that I think are just taken for granted, and that our sort of, let's call it, credentialing institutions are actually quite bad at, and that is in particular around judgment calls, like subjective calls. So part of the skipping steps comes from the fact that if you are like really experienced, you can kind of intuitively make a subjective best practice call, whereas if you are not very experienced, you need to write everything out and be like, hey, if I do this, well, that would be best in this case, and if I do that, it would be best in that case. And maybe, like you weigh, those circumstances have to get blown out so you can pick a sort of Pareto optimal and then even provide some notes on why. Whereas if you're an expert, like you know what it is and you know the reason why, and you say, I took this because of that, and done. But if you're not an expert, you don't even know what the set of things that you're picking from are, much less the implicit subjective choices that define which choice to take in that circumstance.
Thanks, Michael.
I mean, as you find it the same with your work, I'm assuming that similar things arise.
Yeah, I mean, these things, yeah, definitely. And they, I guess, currently the way that I can see how that works. So first of all, the skills and the fragmentizing of the skills also depends on what kind of labor force is available. So like, what does the current market actually provide? What are the things that people come out of university with that are usable? Because then you can kind of compartmentalize them and be like, hey, this is the least amount of work that I need, and there's enough people who can do that. And that makes it already a little bit easier to kind of find the people who don't need too many like creative ways to come up with a solution to a problem. And then on the other hand, because like if you keep the projects relatively short, or like as short as you can, people just go through these experiences, and each time someone is kind of challenged, they either have to find a solution on their own, and that's just how they learn, or because they're working with an expert as that person, and they're always like, I mean, it's a bit more complicated than that, but in an ideal scenario, they're incentivized to also just explain it to them, like their experience on a case-by-case basis. So it's almost like the documentation is only the scaffolding, and all the creative little tiny bits, that's what we call experience.
And to reinforce what everyone was mentioned now, once you get to a certain point of experience or expertise, things just become second nature, and you don't have every step of the process mapped out. You don't have every skill mapped out. You just go on and grow and evolve and probably grow into other areas. I don't know, the product manager might learn marketing, but also a bit about development, but also at the same time a bit about infrastructure, business operations. So for them to get there, it took a certain period of time and experiences for them to develop into that person. And just it's sort of challenging to map out all of those best practices. At the same time, if someone would join at the beginning of their career, or at the beginning of their growth phase, if they would have, again, just a set of best practices from each one of the group of abilities that they would need to put in practice, it would be easy for them to go through, again, through a set of practices, of processes that they would need to follow, and it's only a matter of then just trial and error, and as they would work on a task, in a specific task, like you said, they would probably get to understand the underlying stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, it depends on like essentially how that system is built in, because I see it almost like this could be basically like the genesis for the whole like skill progression system. If that keeps continuing, you basically like any person who uses that system creates a footprint of their own expertise, and then anybody else can follow that along and like build up their own trajectory of where they want to evolve, and also cross organization, because once you finish something, that might be useful somewhere else where you want to continue. And so
also, it's also the point, the plant of the game world itself is changing. Keep in mind, set skills are not static. So like if I went in there as an expert in whatever, and I didn't feel like the existing skills really represented the expertise I had, I would instance new stuff. And I would use that, and maybe I would, by virtue of instancing it, sort of inherit like a claim on those skills from the beginning, but the value of those skills would be tied to the extent to which other people saw the description of the skill and the interaction with people who had that skill as useful. So you have to keep in mind that I would expect whole swaths of that world to grow and die over time, and that the resulting footprint of skills that people cared about would be the ones that had good matchingness between, oh, I want someone with that skill, and when I got someone with that skill, they did in fact accomplish the things I wanted them to accomplish. So there could be a huge skill graveyard of things that never really met that fit. And I think that's actually part of the design, right? The point we actually don't know a priori, so we need a sufficiently rich standard that we can go out and kind of let that actual game surface evolve in addition to the people holding the space.
So yeah,
exactly.
I'm just aware that we have about 7 minutes left for the scheduled time. So do you want to move into like action steps, what is needed next, and then just making sure everyone in this group knows where to go and sign up to a new form if they're interested and they can read this.
Yeah, that would be great. So, I mean, I can quickly show you what that looks like. Or actually, the levels of expertise dynamics. Oh yeah, cool. I guess that was the answer. There. An expert joins that makes all of the other ones fall below his skill cap. What do you mean by that? Sorry. Okay.
Yeah, I could have phrased it better. So when you were showing the collaborators, and then they have various degrees of expertise, I guess, so from level 0 to I think I saw 12 or something. Is that based on the highest expert in that field inside the organization, or is that something that is across all the other?
No, that's
Andrej, you can maybe just show the Miro skill tree.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So if I'm, let's say, a level 7 UI designer, and I'm a level 7 because I'm that far from the expert in that field, does that mean if I keep my skill, but somebody comes along that has a greater skill, will that move me out of my category?
So the skill is tied to the product. The skill is the representation of the ability that the organization is providing to their customers. So, like, if you're like at level 11, let's say, like you can do all of these things, like convert the desktop design to mobile design, like, you know, you have to like rearrange things, make them smaller, jam them in. Then if you can do all these things and someone else can do that, then that's just what it is. So if you're an expert at if you're an expert who can do everything, then whoever comes in and they're basically incentivized to do everything to the same level. They can't like, if they do it better, that's fine. There's no competition between these two people in terms of learning. There is a way that how that can create competition, but that's based on the kind of the demand of the clients. So as long as their needs are met, that's what people will eventually do.
So does that mean that, let's say, PD11, for example, do I need to know how to convert desktop to mobile, or do I need to know all the steps before that, including?
Good question. Yeah, I actually had a previous version of that a couple of months ago, like I think last year, where they were all interdependent and they were like basically levels, and that turned out to be a mistake. So you can grade them, and like I order them by difficulty, but you don't need to be able to do all the other ones below in order to
Yeah, because I think it's kind of a modern thing with the availability of information.
Yeah.
A lot of, let's say, in my case, I'm more like digital stuff, and I didn't go from the start, right? So technically, sometimes I may be able to pull out maybe on a higher degree stuff while actually not having the basics. So then, am I a collaborator at this point? Well, am I a master of that point, but a collaborator in the other points? Are they like?
Well, you're basically
in a circle, or?
You're basically a collaborator as long as you can't do all of these things. So the way that I currently structure it is that if you can do all of them, and if you can like produce your part of the product, like with user testing, let's say you can do all of these 3 things, then you're an expert. If you can do only 2 of them, it doesn't matter which one they are. Like if you can do only 2 out of 3, then you're not able to fulfill the whole thing, and then you don't.
I think the level numbers are a little bit misleading because
They are, yeah.
what's happening is that they're discrete and they don't have to come in order. In your case, you'd probably have the capabilities that map to levels, maybe 3, 5, and 7. Even if you're moving 1, 2, 4, and 6, you could still have that in the system, but it might be natural to pick them up in order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 if you were looking at it anew, but there isn't anything strictly ordered. So I might argue that, at least when I think about mapping these things, I do imagine some dependencies where some things you really have to know in order to do the next thing because just because of the nature of the relationship between the skills, but it's less of a strict ordering and more of a DAG, at least in my mental model. It's a skill tree, literally, but not necessarily the problem to have number 9. If 9 doesn't have 3 as a dependency, then you can get 9 without 3.
Yeah, it's very similar to like Boy Scout badges, right? You need to get a certain progression to get this additional bar, but each badge is kind of independent. I also just wanted to kind of hint at what James said about the Discord link at the end of the type form being broken. So the link is expired. If you fill out that form, it's an invalid poo link. So you might want to fix that.
Yeah, I'll send it to you in the Telegram. Yeah, that's easiest. Yeah, the way I currently built these things up is just for context for the people that they are graded by difficulty, but they're not like necessarily interdependent.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, thanks for everything. Okay, I think we have to finish up. So yeah, if you're not in the Telegram group, join it, and I'll post whichever one of these forms that is into the Telegram group.
Does the Discord link lead to something on the deepwork group?
Discord?
Yeah, the type form at the end of it is a Discord link, not the Telegram.
I don't know.
Okay.
That one, right? I should just submit, and that's it. There could be another type form somewhere. Anyway, here, this is the type form. Just fill that out, and then I'll reach out to you, and also post it in the Telegram in a moment. Cool. Okay, let's see what that is. Yeah, I don't know. Cool. Thanks for finding. I'll see what that is. It could be that it was linking to an example of how something works on the Discord to show it, but that's irrelevant. All right. Yeah, thank you so much for coming around. I really enjoyed the conversation. If you're interested in like more of my time and attention, just send me a message. And otherwise, yeah, here's the also in the Telegram group, the platform. That would be great. I think this is really cool to work on, and I can't do it alone. So I'm happy for any help, and I really appreciate also, Michael, your help and your enthusiasm for pushing this. Wouldn't have happened otherwise, or at least not this fast. So yeah, I guess that's it. Let me know if you have any other things, and I'll see you next time when we will discuss the costs and how to compensate the work.
Cheers, everyone. Nice talking. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for putting it together. Bye.